Pope John Paul II, will you lead us in prayer? In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Okay, this is an actual prayer, so let's actually pray. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. God, I ask you to anoint the time spent both in recording but in experience. Okay, it's working. That was weird. Right as I started to pray, it was like, freeze. Okay, so it actually freezed in the middle of prayer, so I'm just going to pray real fast. So God, please anoint everybody who is listening to this with your Spirit and bring us all deeper into your heart during this time. And we pray for everybody who's being affected by the coronavirus, that there will be healing quickly and meaning in their suffering. We ask all this in your name. But that's okay, you know? You guys have been telling me for ages. I think you're just trolling me, but you know, sometimes these things come to life anyways. You've been telling me for ages that I need to become a vlogger. So here we are. It's finally happening. Okay. And I know I don't have like one of those fancy cameras, but I do have this really cute cup. It's empty. Okay. So today's objective. You approve? Take yourself seriously. Today's objective is to describe how both the coronavirus and the God who we know loves us can both exist. So this is probably something that's been on your minds. It's been on my mind. It's been on many people's minds. I think no matter how faithful you are, the question always kind of pops back into your... Maybe not. I don't want to say that. Maybe some people don't have this question. But I know for me, it's been a part of my journey that this question pops back into my head every time some kind of disaster strikes. How is it that God can be good and we can have these horrific, seemingly nonsensical events that strike us on a global scale, right? So what I did was I've looked into this many times before and I've gotten great responses, and I feel at this point equipped to handle that question when it comes into my head. But I did go back to get a little bit more specific research, and so what this video that I'm making right now is going to be is pretty much a summary geared towards younger ears of two other videos. And they are by Bishop Robert Barron, who is the really smart bishop whose videos we watch every once in a while. He is a bishop in Ventura, so he's in Los Angeles, the Archdiocese of Los Angeles. And he has this very, very, very popular YouTube channel and very, very, very popular podcast. So 2 videos that he made about suffering over the years. Very simple. If God is good, then why does evil exist? And another video called Bishop Barron Comments on Stephen Fry, Job, and Suffering. And then the last one that I listened to, but it contained some of the same points, was actually called Hope in the Time of Coronavirus. And I think that's a podcast that he has out. So most of these ideas come from him, but ultimately they are church teachings. I'm taking what he taught me from his videos and from his podcast, and I'm kind of translating it and putting it into a cohesive sort of, a smaller, more cohesive lecture for people of your age. So, yeah. Okay. So this question, as I said before, comes up from age to age to age. If God is good, then why did blank happen? And the example that Bishop Barron used was this crazy earthquake that happened in like Lisbon, I think in like the 1700s or something. It was like maybe 1800s, I don't know. But it was this horrible earthquake in Lisbon, and you know how earthquakes are sometimes, because they're all connected to like tectonic plates. If it happens in one place, it might happen in another place. So this earthquake strikes in Lisbon, and I want to say like hours later, maybe a different timeline, I don't know, one strikes in San Francisco, and then and that's another, like, even, well, I don't know about even more, but that also is horribly destructive, and tons of people die. And then in order to escape from the destruction in the city, they flee to the beach. And of course, this huge tsunami takes them over. So we have this like horrific natural event that, you know, no person was the cause of it. And when we look at that, it has the potential to kind of shake our faith. Yeah. So Bishop Barron starts there in one of his videos. And the other one, he talks about this guy, Stephen Fry, who is a famous person of some kind. And he is kind of an extreme atheist. And he was asked in an interview, let's say, like, imagine that turns out God is real, and you meet him at the pearly gates. What do you ask him? Just like hypothetically, if God were real and you got to meet him, what would you ask him? And he said he would want God to explain like little kids with bone cancer to him. And he said, like, you know, if God was real and he allowed something so horrific to happen, or he caused something so horrific to happen, then I wouldn't want to spend eternity with him anyways. And like hearing that is like painful, but that's what he said. And I think it does kind of speak to what some people feel. So how do we respond to that as people of faith? Or how do we talk ourselves back into our faith, right? When we find ourselves going into that rabbit hole, how do we either get ourselves out of it or kind of respond to other people who are experiencing it, whatever it may be? So we need to find a way to reconcile these horrible events and these natural disasters with a belief in a personal God who actually loves us. So we have two easy answers that are probably false. So we have Stephen Fry's answer that God doesn't exist. You know, these horrible events are proof that there is no loving God. So that's that. That's the one easy answer that's probably false. And the other one is that God is punishing humanity. I don't know if you've heard that one or not. I know that was something I was talking to a friend about. I think he was mostly trying to troll me. But he was like, oh, maybe it's the wrath of God. And I was like, chill. But let's actually talk about it. So I will get into both. I'm going to get into responding to both of those. And I think what Bishop Barron gave to us is that the truth lies in a third way of approaching this problem. So, next slide. Sorry, I'm like scratching my face. I did my face up a little bit because I needed to feel like I was like an adult person with a job for a second, because, you know, it's just been really different being at home day after day after day. Okay. Back to theology. So a really important underlying principle for all of this is to always look at what do we actually know about God and know about God's creation that is related to this before we go and make this grand call that either, you know, God is causing these horrible things or that he doesn't exist. So one of the main things in the problem of evil is this, that God's creation contains freedom. So, and you're thinking, but freedom is a good thing. Yeah. Here's the thing, though. Evil and humans wouldn't exist if there was no free will. And free will, of course, is the freedom to choose. So we wouldn't have any evil in our world if there were no free will. Okay. But love wouldn't exist either. And that freedom wouldn't exist, right? So this is interesting that we say to ourselves, you know, there should be no evil in the world. God should cast it out. But one of the things that God chose to do when he created his creation was to allow human beings especially to have this experience of freedom to choose. To either choose, as it says in scripture, light or darkness, to choose life or death. And without that free will, we don't get love. We don't get heroic people. We don't really even get happiness, right? But with that free will, we also have the other side, right? With great power comes great responsibility. We have the other side, where if there's evil, you also have freedom. Sorry, if there's free will, you also have the freedom to choose against the good, which is the evil. So that's for humans, right? And that would respond to our questions about why do people do horrible things? Or why do horribly evil things happen because of other people? Well, that would be because of free will, right? But other things, when we talk about when the cause of an evil is some kind of other creature or something in nature, right? So animals, bacteria, viruses, weather patterns, natural disasters, whatever. So all of those other creatures or other parts of creation have their own naturally created, like by God. So God creates this natural rhythm or pattern or instinct that they have. He instills those in them, okay? That's a part of, sorry, I just got a text message. Don't respond. That is a part of how God created all of creation, is that they all have some kind of natural rhythm and natural pattern, all right? So our Earth has like plate tectonics. The plates move, right? But in response to the convection currents underneath, right? There's this whole process about how our plates move. And I'm not an expert in this, but I bet some of that plate moving has something to do with why our world is the way that it is, including both good things and bad things, right? So we know that earthquakes are a result of plate tectonics, but I should look into this more. I don't know for sure. But I wonder if there are things about our Earth that are really, really good that wouldn't exist without plate tectonics. Actually, yeah, I know for sure. So like mountains, beautiful mountains, canyons, the Grand Canyon, plate tectonics are the cause of those things, right? So, however, when those things do result in some kind of suffering, we call that natural evil. And that's evil that comes about as a consequence of natural processes in the world, okay? So those are like nobody's fault exactly. It's really important to recognize that when we look at God's relationship to all of creation, he doesn't control them. He creates them and then they have their own integrity, right? He creates them with these processes that allow mountains to form, or these processes that allow evolution to occur, right? And then they have their own integrity. So evolution, for example, gave rise to this amazing diversity of animals, but there's also reason to believe that God would use it to bring about humans, right? So we have all this amazing results of evolution potentially, but it also is what brings about pathogens. Things like the coronavirus come about because of evolution, right? So God, therefore, we can start to see that his instilling freedom or natural integrity or whatever it is into the things in his creation means that he permits some kind of evil in order to bring about some kind of good, okay? Now, another thing to recognize here is that all of this starts, of course, well, not all of it, but the human evil starts with the fall, okay? And humans, as the crown of creation, have a lot of effect on the rest of the world, okay? And we can see that right now, all over the place, in terms of how our species has drastically affected almost every other species. So, let me make sure the video is still going. Yes, it is. Wait. Okay. It's important to recognize that our actions do have consequences, okay? And sometimes those consequences are massive. Now, like for example, I was reading up that some scientists think that a bunch of like new diseases are the result of messing up like natural habitats. So, places where viruses and bacteria used to live happily without causing all of this strife that we're experiencing get moved out of their natural habitat into our habitat. Now that might be an overly simplistic thing. I don't want to go and say like, that's the reason why the coronavirus happened. But it is important to recognize that humans' actions have these massive effects on the entire world, right? And sometimes those effects can be quite significant. So, that said, God himself can never be identified as a cause of evil. Why? Couldn't he do anything? Sure. But God in his essence, like who God is love. That's in 1 John chapter 4, verse 9. God is love. Sorry, there's my roommates. I don't know if you can hear them, but they're giggling away. What you guys laughing about without me? Okay, sorry. So if God is love, then he cannot cause evil, because it's just not who he is, okay? So that's important, that we have to recognize that reality. Like, do I believe that truth, that God is love? And sometimes that's something that we'll struggle with, and we have to kind of work through it and talk to God about it, and talk to other people about it. It's difficult for somebody to believe that God is love sometimes, but that is an underlying principle here, okay? So God is love, so he can't cause evil. It's just not who he is. Now, that said, what is evil? And this is where, if we were in a classroom, I would go, what is evil? Raise hands, raise hands, raise hands, raise hands. Then I'd go to a popsicle stick, and I would wait. Just kidding. Okay, so think about that. I'll wait like Dora. What is evil? That was my Dora the Explorer impression. I don't know what she says after she asks the question. Great job! Or something, whatever. So, the cringiness must persist. Evil is not just like hurt. It's not just harm, okay? We need to reframe how we think of evil as like its own strong entity that's like stronger than good. No. Evil is a lack of good. It's like a void, like a hole where good should be, okay? And good is so good that when it's missing, it's like painful. It causes pain, right? So we shouldn't think of evil as its own like little force. It's actually a lack of good, okay? So like when we think about the forces of evil, what they're missing is their relationship with God. They rejected a relationship with God, so they are missing something, okay? They don't have something that God doesn't have. They are missing God. Okay, so we know that evil, this like lack of good, enters the world as a result of the fall, and that human evil, honestly guys, is probably the cause of most suffering in the world. We do have these natural disasters sometimes, but ultimately people choosing things against love is the source of much of the suffering in the world. That's not to say that COVID is the response of that. I don't think so, but like we need to recognize that a lot of the suffering does come from those like choices, right? But God permits certain evils in order to allow greater goods to come about. Okay, moving on. So, you might hear all of that, and you might say, well, then there should be no freedom. Everyone would be better off without it, because all the suffering is always here, so we don't need freedom. Let's just all be comfortable all the time, and then there will be no suffering and no freedom, and we'll be fine. I would say that, make sure that you're not being hasty, because that is far too easy of a statement to make, okay? With absolutely no experience of what that would be like. Think about all of the countries in the world that just wish they had freedom, right? Liberty. Think about how you feel when your freedom and your liberty is taken away. It's not something to take lightly. So, recognize that without free will and without creatures with their own integrity, life would be kind of unrecognizable, okay? I don't even know how to describe it. Maybe something that you could think about is like those dystopian stories, like maybe like The Giver. I don't know, I never actually read The Giver, to be honest. But where everybody is like controlled to supposedly keep evil away, right? Like the government's like, I know, we'll control everyone, then no evil will happen, right? Everybody's like, no, they hate it. It doesn't work, right? So without that free will, without having our own integrity, without an earth that has its own integrity, life would be unrecognizable. So we shouldn't just say, well, then freedom is bad. No, it's not, okay? Okay. So we actually... Can you hear that? My roommates are listening to something without me. They're watching a movie. It's okay. Okay. So, in the Bible, we actually have Job, the character Job, which some of you are familiar with. asking God about suffering directly, okay? So Job, if you're not familiar with the story, it's a pretty intense story. He's this really good guy in the Bible. And it starts out with like how good he is. And then he goes through like every type of suffering imaginable. It's just problem after problem after problem after problem. And his friends come in and try to give him advice and explanations, and they fail. They're like horrible explanations. They're like bad theology, the whole thing. So they leave, and Job ends up complaining to God and asking him for an explanation, right? And he's very like upfront with God. I forgot what he says exactly. It's something like, why have you made me my target? Or why have you made me your target? So that's that feeling of like, God, why would you do this to me? Okay? And this is a very honest statement that Job makes, and most of us at some point in our lives feel that way. And it can be really good to be honest with God like that. And God responds, okay? And it can sound a little bit like God is being kind of like scary when he responds, but I think that what he does is like bring about this great confidence in the power of God, okay? So he says this, Job chapter 38, verse 2. Who is this, talking about Job, that darkens counsel by words without knowledge? So what does that mean? Who is this that, like, darkens counsel? That, how do I put it? I mean, it's basically like, who is this that speaks without knowing really what he's talking about? Yeah. And then he says in verses 4 and 5, where were you when I laid the foundation of the earth? Yeah. So going and saying like, you know what, Job, like actually I'm the creator here. Okay. Where were you when I laid the foundation of the earth? Tell me if you have understanding. Who determined its measurements? Surely you know, right? And this shouldn't, well, let me explain it first. So this is God coming in and saying like, okay, so you think that you can make this grand assertion, this grand statement about how just or merciful I am. That's God speaking, right? You think you can come in here and tell me that I'm not being just enough or that I'm not being merciful enough. So he's kind of like calling Job out and calling all of us out for making these like massive statements about what makes God good or bad, okay? So Job basically says to God, you know, if you're good, you couldn't possibly allow these things. So you better stop, right? And while this is a very honest statement, and I don't think we should be afraid to make it if it's really what's in our hearts, because I do think, like, what happens ultimately after God speaks to Job with this long speech, Job comes back to God, and he's like, thank you. I am ready to be reconciled with you, right? There's healing in that. So I don't think it's something to be hidden. But that said, Job makes that statement, if you're good, you couldn't possibly allow these things. And the fact is that that's kind of, you know, a symptom, and I've made that statement before, so this is talking about myself too. It's a symptom of like profound arrogance, right? Like very deep sense of like, I know what's right and everybody else has it wrong. Yeah. Right? Like the fact is, who am I to say what God can and cannot allow, right? Now I already said God is love, so I know that he's not going to cause suffering. But I don't know what he can allow. I don't know what he can't allow. I don't know what he can bring good out of, right? Except actually, if I went into scripture, I would find that he can make good out of anything. And I think that's what Job forgets, and that's what we forget when we are acting like Job, which happens, right? Okay, so this is the last thing that Bishop Barron says that I think is, well, he says two things last. But this is a really, really insightful way of putting it. So imagine a long story like, I don't know, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. Or like The Hunger Games. Or Divergent. Lord of the Rings, Harry Potter, whatever. Okay, it's this long saga of a story. And it rips out like one page. Somebody rips out a page and tears it up and crumbles it and throws it on the ground. And it gets carried through the wind off into like, I don't know, like Northern California. Somebody picks it up by a sequoia tree. That's what's in Northern California, right? They pick it up and they see, I don't know, it's some like horrible part of like the Hunger Games, right? Or some horrible part of the story. They read this little snippet and they go, oh my gosh, this looks like a horrible story. Wherever this page came from, this is horrific. And I assume that the story is horrible and that the writer is horrible. Yeah? So I pick up this random page from a story, and then I'm going to assume that whoever wrote it must be absolutely sick in the head to write something like that, because it's so horrible. Yeah? Like, and every story that we've liked at some point contains some moment of suffering, pretty much, right? Even something like Wonder or something like that. They all contain suffering at some point. And if we were to read just that one sentence about some horrible instance of suffering in the story, we might assume that whoever wrote it is wrong or is bad. But we have to recognize that there's a deep flaw there when we only look at one part of the story, okay? Because if you look at the long run of the story of the Hunger Games, there's redemption at the end. If you look at the long run of Harry Potter, there's redemption at the end. All of them, right? Wonder, Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, The Giver, Holes, right? Tuck Everlasting, every single one of them. So this is the fact. If our God is who he says he is, and he is, good comes out of every evil situation, even if it takes years, and even if the good at the end is that you are holy enough to get to heaven, right? This doesn't mean that good, right? So let's say that, I don't know, the good of Miss O'Brien. I shouldn't say my name on the internet safety. That my vlog is coming out as a response of COVID, right? That doesn't mean that COVID happened so that I can make a vlog, right? It just means that that is a good that had its cause as this crazy thing. My roommate just coughed. Okay. But, I mean, some pretty hard-hitting examples are like, if there was no Hitler, there would be no Maximilian Kolbe. There'd be no Anne Frank is so sad. But yeah, there would be no Diary of Anne Frank. But there would be no heroism of St. Maximilian Kolbe stepping out and becoming the inspiration of, I think, many of us in our classes. For me, if there was no suffering at leaving my family to go to grad school or to teach at our school, then I would never have had the experiences of doing that, right? And the most hard-hitting example is if there was no crucifixion. Can you see it? I don't know if you can. They're over there. Look at this. This is my little church. Boop. I don't know if you saw that or not. If there was no crucifixion, there would be no resurrection, right? If there's no crucifixion, there would be no torn veil of the temple where we're able to come into this deep relationship with God. Yeah? So I want to close with a story that Bishop Barron tells. I think it's like a Chinese proverb. That has this idea of like, you can never know the full consequences of an event, okay? So it starts like this. There's this guy who owns a farm, and he has like horses and stuff, or a horse, and his horse runs away, and his friends come over and they go, oh my gosh, that's horrible, you have such bad luck. And he goes, we shall see. And then a few days later, the horse comes back bringing along 2 other horses, and his friends come along. They go, oh my gosh, that's awesome, like, see, it's fine, like, you'd have good luck, it's fine. And he goes, we shall see. And then his son hops on one of the horses that got brought back, and he's going for a ride, and he falls off and he breaks his leg. And his friends come and they're like, oh, this is so horrible, you have such bad luck. And he goes, we shall see. And then finally the government comes and they're drafting people for the army, and they're going to take his son, but they can't because he has a broken leg. And his friends come back and they go, oh, that's such good luck, you know, we thought it was horrible that your son broke his leg, but actually maybe it's fine, like maybe it was a stroke of good luck. And the guy goes, we shall see, right? And the point of that is that whether an event is good or bad, we actually can never know the full consequences of it, right? And I think we can fall short when we assume that if there is no suffering, then the thing is good, or if there is suffering, then the thing will only cause badness, right? For sure, we never want to go and say like, oh, it's good that this horrible thing is happening. No, it's not. But it will always lead to some kind of good if we let it, okay? Now, something that's really important with that is recognizing the good, okay? So that is something that I'm going to ask you guys to do, and we'll talk about it tomorrow in our Zoom meeting. What are some good things that have come about in your life since we started staying at home because of COVID? COVID, when I say COVID, it means coronavirus. So what are some good things that have come about in your life since we started staying home? There will be a place to post that on Google Classroom, and then we'll also talk about it on Zoom. I'm gonna have you guys, after I post Wednesday's video, which is gonna be about like literally what do we do about this particular situation, meaning all of the things with like our churches closing and all that stuff. What do we do with that? Like, that's pretty crazy, right? Wow, I'm talking really fast. Breathe. Okay. When I have that going, then I will explain to you what the rest of your assignment for the week is going to be. But you will be expected to kind of explain what happened in this video to some extent. Now I'm sharing this at the end. Actually, I'm still not going to share. If you are feeling overwhelmed with the amount of information, fear not. More resources are coming your way. But do everything you can to kind of get a sense of what I talked about here. But fear not. More resources are coming your way so that we can kind of break this down and it's not just me talking here in my special chair with a candle next to me. That's not what it's always going to be, okay? But I wanted to try this out. Okay, so everybody, I hope that might have answered some of your questions. And if you're sitting there and you're like, what did she just talk about? That was like a full-blown, like, theology vomit. Like, do me a favor and write down some specific questions that you have. So maybe, like, just find points where you're like, yeah, that's what I didn't get. Like, this point that you made from, like, here to here, where you went from, like, this point to this point, I lost you, okay? Or, like, that word that you said, I don't know what that means. If that's the case, go ahead and look those words up, whatever it is. But then, if you can't, just talk to me. We'll talk about it on Zoom. What I would suggest for all the Zoom meetings is that you get on at the top of the meeting. That way you don't miss it. If somebody, like, asks an important question, you don't want to miss it. So I suggest that you get on at the top of the meeting, and see if you can get all your questions answered. And as a group, if you can get all your questions answered, rather than coming in like the last 10 minutes and being like, oh, what did I miss? You know what I mean? So do your best to do that. Okay, so everybody, I look forward to talking to you on Zoom, finally seeing your little faces. Please, I would love if you came to Zoom tomorrow for Tuesday, because I miss you guys. I want to see your little faces. Okay, so in all seriousness, glory be to God. Keep Jesus in your heart. Remember, Mary is covering you with her veil. That's the veil. And